If Africa tomorrow, for a week, shut down, no, you're not taking, we're not going to allow no planes, no ships, no whatever, however they get stuff out, our minerals, if that was to be happen for a week, Europe would crumble.
Let me give you a slight pushback that I know some people. And I know this was based upon my experience as a part of the movement and these kinds of things. There are some who, again, as you said, just don't want nothing to do with them. There are others who say, well, I would understand it as a strategy, but when we're dealing with allyship, oftentimes we hear the term strategic alliances. Are we in a position as a people to make the most of strategic alliances, in the sense of the fact that to be able to advocate and leverage benefits in an allied relationship? You have to be in a certain level of organization, a certain level of unity, you know what I'm saying? So are we as a people, as a community in this country, at the stage of development that would justify a level of allyship in a way that won't allow the allies to then co-opt the agenda, you know what I'm saying, towards their own
I hear what you're asking, and my answer to it is not a simple answer, because I think I need to answer it on two levels. As a people, we're not yet, as a people, but we can't wait for our people to be globally organized as a nation. It's nonsense to think that we can wait for that until we utilize allies, okay? Especially those of us who are in Britain, where a lot of the time the oppression that is coming against us, because we ourselves have been shut out of corridors of power, white power, and really would we want to be in corridors of white power? That's another argument. But that's not our system. That system is designed to work against us. But there have been some people who go against that very system, even though it benefits them. I'm not saying they do it for totally altruistic reasons all the time. I'm not saying they do it willingly. Sometimes they're forced. In various ways. There comes a time when it may be in their interest, because everything is about interest. Yes. And even our own people align sometimes with our enemies and oppressors because it furthers their immediate interests. So this notion that allies have not been involved in our struggle, especially where we are a minoritized group in numbers. We're majority populations, but in terms of us being able to wield our power, because of the machinations of white power that is a global system of white supremacy, we don't control even the levers of so-called the international institutions. So what do? Do we wait until Africa is totally recolonized? We can't do that. If you look at countries today that have been trying to stand up for some degree of self-determination, let's look at Zimbabwe. What happened to them when they were shut out of the so-called Commonwealth? What happened to them in terms of the destabilizing of their currency? Where did they turn to as a country, a so-called sovereign African country, which really isn't fully sovereign because the land issue? So they have degrees of, if you like, autonomy, but it's not full sovereignty. They had to form alliances. Now that a lot of our people who are not at the receiving end, and there's lots of issues with some of the alliances that are being made at the state level, I recognize that. But let us not delude our people. Our people are in a war situation. All right? We're not waiting for a war to come to us. We are in war. And this has been a war that is, for some people would say hundreds of years, and others would say thousands of years, at least 6,000. But let's look at the modern phase of it. When you are in a war situation, you will form alliances on the basis of your interests. Now, in the UK, in terms of our people, if our people were supporting this strategy, Okay? They don't have to even support this. You can support another organisation that is coming on the march that has its own. You can support them. You don't have to support the Stop the Manganese campaign, even the Commission of Inquiry, or even the March Committee. Yeah. But you have a right as an African to be on that march. So in terms of so-called non-African allies, in terms of us as a people, we've not been able to harness that totally effectively, but there have been instances where it has worked. So if we look at even the anti-colonial struggles, some of the way in which we were able to wage armed resistance was through forming alliances with certain powers, including Russia, Cuba, countries that were supporting armed struggle to actually defend lands in Africa. You could say Russia had its own interests, but that's what all groups and peoples do. Everyone has interests. Yes. The question is, you have to weigh up, when you are in a war situation, where are you going to draw support from? And sometimes you will draw support from some of the most unexpected places. And that might be just around that particular cause that you need it for. And there might be struggles around other things. So I emphasize, we're in a war situation. Our people are having to resist war. All kinds of war. Spiritual war, cultural war, economic war, political warfare, and directly our young people are caught up in street battles, which is a form of warfare. It's just that it's not clear who the enemy is and who we should be fighting, okay? So when you are in that situation and you know that you lack the numerical strength and sometimes the political power, the economic power, even the military power or the threat of it, it's not even like you have to use it, then you have to draw support, which is why people form alliances from other quarters, even as part of your own defense. So if you have some non-African allies, like what we've seen in this country, I'll give a very good example. Deportations. Many of those who have tried to stop deportations flights have been allies. Deportations flights to the Caribbean.
As a result of the Windrush.
As a result of Windrush, and also to Africa. Have been non-Africans. Okay? Now, sometimes you utilize allies, non-African allies, strategically. If you know about some of these cases, some of the consequences of taking actions like that bring one up possibly on anti-terror charges. So not all of our people are willing, quite frankly, to go through that sufferation. Some of us say we've suffered enough. Some of us are cowardly. Some of us don't support our own. Okay? But then there may be people outside of our community who feel strongly about that cause and they are prepared sometimes to lay themselves on the line in recognition of their own privilege. Sometimes maybe it's a historical sense of guilt. I don't know. I don't know what is in the psyche of someone who's not African as to why they choose to do these things. But that has been the case. Now, I'm talking specifically about the march now, because in answering your question, I have to say that there has been some degree of preparedness through particular formations that do work with allies. So allies coming on the march this year, the preparation for some of those who may be coming on the march this year has been in the running nearly 20 years of working in other structures and through other processes that allies have supported our self-determined struggle. Now the question is this: what is the fear? Is the fear that we are not confident in our own African voice, that we're going to be co-opted? Those of us who are seen as leading these processes are not corruptible. We're not. We have never let our community down. We have never betrayed our community. And in fact, many of us have quite the opposite, have experienced that punishment through aligning with this cause. Yeah? So people shouldn't be afraid of that. And we have to be confident enough in the strength of our own advocacy and our own forms of organisation. And not all forms of organising are allies welcome. But the march is not one of those structures that is a semi-clandestine or even clandestine secret society. It's not. And we have to have those, and we do. And that's where other kind of planning and preparation on all kinds of level must go on. Okay? But in terms of the street column of the international social movement for African reparations, allies are part of, in some instances, and can be part of a self-defense mechanism. Because, and I don't want to say too much here because I don't want to scare people, but there is going to come a time when we're going to have to defend ourselves in terms of our struggle for reparatory justice. Because when our people start, and this is something we advocate directly in the Stop the Maangamizi campaign, we advocate open resistance, including shutting down of Maangamizi crime scenes, primarily in Africa and other sites of the African diaspora. Let's just take an example of mine. Let's look at what happened in Azania, South Africa, with Marikana. What happened when our people tried to engage in a shutdown to withdraw their labour? What happened? They were shot at by the so-called ANC government. So when we are tired of begging, when we are tired of pleading, when we are tired of appealing to what we see as the goodwill or conscience of some people, as some people feel that that's what we need to do, then we're going to have to get the backbone to realise that we're going to have to take what belongs to us. And when our people start doing that en masse, there are going to be reprisals. There are going to be consequences, because if you can imagine, if Africa tomorrow, for a week, shut down, no, you're not taking, we're not going to allow no planes, no ships, no whatever, however they get stuff out, our minerals, if that was to be happen for a week, Europe would crumble. America would crumble. But do you think people who are holding on to remnants of empire are going to sit by with all the military sophistication they have and allow that to happen? Or will we have a Grenada? Will we have an invasion? Because we've had it before in our recent history. So, when we march through the streets of London, it is in preparation for what will come. It will come. Because whether people are engaged in non-violent action, which most people are, whether they feel that they need to now up it up to actual, armed self-defense or revolutionary struggle, which some of us actually believe will happen, okay? Let's just be very real about this. Then our people need to know, how do you wage guerrilla struggle when you are diaspora populations? And that's why even marching through the streets and being able to garner support from populations around you who can hide you, who can provide resources, who can give you intelligence about what's coming up ahead. Now, if we're in our own country, where we're 99.9% of the population, there's really no need for a non-African ally. But we are in Europe. We are in the brain, this is the brainchild of global white supremacy racism. Let's make no mistake about that. It's here. This is the brains. Because even those US presidents, they always come back here to England. And they come to their Masonic lodges and they do all their kinds of stuff in terms of cementing their power spiritually and in other kinds of ways through the rituals that they do. So if we know that, then part of our tactic must be about how do we try and also cause a chasm in the ranks of European society. How how do we get some of their own people who historically they've always been able to co-opt and seduce into oppressing some of us in terms of colonialism and so forth? How do we get them to now turn their own anger about their own dispossession, which has there's never really been a popular revolution here in Britain, in England. We had French, they're not in England. And there was something called the Peterloo Massacre, which I encourage, there's a film about it, I encourage people to see it. Because when you know their history, and even now with the Brexit, you can see the chasms amongst them. We need to exploit those. Look what's happening around Brexit. Even their own political tensions, the nationalist struggles they have amongst them in terms of Welsh independence, Scottish independence, what's going on in terms of Ireland, Northern Ireland, and the Irish people saying we want one Ireland. So this is what we have to see, that in their house there is disunity. And part of guerrilla tactics are, how do you now utilize what we know is going on amongst them in our interests? And come on, my people. Look, we're the mothers and fathers of human civilization. Okay? And in terms of warfare and strategy and knowing how to organize, our people have mastered that. Let's study some of those historical examples. Let's study the Haitian Revolution. Let's look at what happened when, as I said, some of the European armies defected in defense of our struggle, because certain agreements were reached around what would happen if that revolution should succeed, which it did. So when we tell our story, yes, it's right that we focus on us and the role we play. That is essential for our self-esteem, our sense of spiritual power, and just like dignity and self-respect, but also let us tell the story correctly about the role. It could have been 0.0.1%. But that 0.1% could have been significant when it came to certain battles or holding certain, areas. So our struggle as African people is a nationalist struggle in terms of the African nation. When I personally have spoken to European nationalists, those who want Irish self-determination or Scottish self-determination, or Welsh determination. Study the experiences of England vis-a-vis those nations. See what was done to some of those people in the name of founding the UK. And you'll see lots of blood, gore, horror stories. And some of the mechanisms that they adopted during colonialism and chattel enslavement, they tried on their own people first. So there's still a lot of hurt and unresolved issues amongst Europeans, the European nations or family of nations. And in this moment, we have to be able to utilize that for our interests. Now, the problem is if you have people trying to do that when they're not clear of who they are, what is their nation, what they're fighting for, what their people's struggle is. But I'm telling you, people who are involved in this march, they are nationalists. Whether they're talking about a black nation, whether they're talking about a Pan-African nation, but they are clear that our people had autonomy and sovereignty, and that's what needs to be restored. They're not people who think reparations is having a black person in number 10 or in the White House, of which some of our people think that.
Yes.
Okay? So we need to recognize where some of these ideas are coming from, okay? And in terms of the march, it's a street column of the International Social Movement for African Reparations. It's about preparing us through the different ways. Let's look at the history of Carnival. The originators of Carnival, many of our people like our sister, Claudia Jones and others, they were not only Pan-Africanists, many of them were communists, and that's a particular form of organizing. That was, so even though many people might have come out and it was about the revelry, it also, the strategists behind it also saw it in a different way. And this is the sophistication of our people's strategy and tactics when we are in a territory that we do not control and that we are trying to build influence. We are trying to win over hearts and minds. And our young people are very influential in this because through music and popular culture, a lot of our young people are influencing non-Africans. Not always in the way that we would like, but that is a form of power. The question is, how do we wield that power? Now this year, just to be very specific, in terms of allies, we know that some allies have expressed an interest on coming onto the march. There is an allies bloc, a non-African allies bloc, and actually we shouldn't have to be having this conversation every year because this is not a new thing. It was introduced in 2016 and we have done extensive talking about this, trying to reason with our people. You know, even if some people don't like it, most people understand the reasoning if we have that honest conversation. And of course, you're going to get some who will never accept it. We recognise that. And yes, there will be some losses. The odd one or two person may feel, I cannot come out on a march because there's going to be 1 or maybe 10 non-African people on it. I mean, you know, that's their view and they're entitled to that. But when we live in a society that we don't control, I kind of struggle with that kind of absolutist thinking because we do lack self-determination here. Now, we are struggling to restore it, but we can never have full self-determination here in Europe. Let's just be very clear about that. This is not our home. Now, some of us are making it our home and we're trying to win certain concessions so that we can just survive and actually build ourselves as a community. And so even the notion that we have a right to autonomous institutions is very necessary as a survival mechanism. But we're not going to have self-determination here when we don't have it in Africa. And the self-determination here has to be linked to Africa, restoring and averting the recolonization of Africa. Now this year, we have developed some alliances, some of us, not everybody on the march, but via the Stop the Maangamizi campaign. Let me just be very explicit. I'm actually on the march committee, but I'm also on the Stop the Maangamizi campaign. So I straddle both, and there are some people on the African Emancipation Day Reparations March committee that are not part of the campaign. But the campaign is married to the march, okay? And through the Stop the Maangamizi campaign, that is the mechanism that has been building alliances. Because we cannot be talking about an all-party parliamentary commission of inquiry without dealing with non-Africans. It's just nonsensical. So this is my question. What people understand by reparations, and if it's self-repair, we've got our own spaces where we can just be with each other and not have to deal with anyone else. Cool. But a large part of why I know people turn out on the march is that they know it's not just about self-repair. They believe that there is still some accountability that the British state, European institutions, rich families that have profited from, you know, our people's enslavement, that we need to hold them to account in some way, shape or form, which is called external reparations. And so when you're dealing with external reparations, you have to challenge the power of those people that's trying to deny you your entitlement with your own power. Hence why we talk about in aim 4 of the march, challenging establishment power with our own grassroots power to secure reparatory justice on our terms. And allies, non-African allies, have been playing a role in that. Not through the African Emancipation Day Reparations March Committee, because that is our structure. It's self-determinedly us. But through the Stop the Mangamizi campaign, that it's, if you like, married to, it's the campaign that works with allies. In other structures where those battles, because there are battles, there are differences, there are struggles, ideologically, politically, spiritually even, and otherwise, but they get waged elsewhere in structures that bring people together, which are most structures, to be quite frank, in the UK and in Europe, most. And we, through the Stop the Mangamizi campaign, have been working with Extinction Rebellion in particular.
Which is interesting.
Yes, it is. People might think, well, what's the link? I'll tell you what's the link.
Yeah.
Some of the manifestations of the Mangamizi today that are impacting us disproportionately don't just impact African people, on people of African heritage. Some of them, in terms of structural systems of domination and the harm to our motherland and our Mother Earth, also impact anyone who may be physically in that place. So ecocide. Yeah. Our campaign is Stop the Mangamizi. We charge genocide. We charge ecocide. We existed before Stop the Extinction Rebellion. And that ecocide, we didn't just add it this year, it was there from the founding of the framing of the petition from 2015 to a Stop the Mangamizi petition. It actually was developed in 2003, but it wasn't called Stop the Mangamizi, it was just We Charge Genocide. And it was modelled on the historic 1951 We Charge Genocide petition that was initiated by the Civil Rights Congress of the United States of America, involving people like Paul Robeson and others, okay? So we, in the tradition of supporting our people's struggle, even internationally, and recognising the international dimensions of that initiative, we developed one here in the UK, early 2000s. It was only after the 2014 March, and we felt there was a need to distinguish between the petition that got handed in year one, over which there is still some differences of views around, and let's leave that to history. But from 2015, we wanted to distinguish, and that is why it then got renamed the Stop the Mangamizi We Charge Genocide, Ecocide petition and campaign.
Because I know of, even among the European community, there is some conflict about Extinction Rebellion.
Oh, absolutely.
You know what I'm saying?
Yes, I mean, there's lots. I mean, trust me, we get to hear all of them, and don't think that some of us are not hearing these things. Don't think some of us are not even agreeing with some of these things. Oh, we're not naive, but this is about struggle. As I said, we're in a war. And some of us are involved with Extinction Rebellion, and we have a strategy, we have interests, okay? Now, my role in Extinction Rebellion and people I work with is via the Stop the Mangamizi campaign. So we have not just gone into Extinction Rebellion, or XR as it's called, and kind of diffused ourselves. No, we have been seconded from the campaign, which is autonomous African, but to work in this structure. And we are there first and foremost to Stop the Mangamizi campaign in affinity with those people who are not non-African, who are rebelling against ecocide, because the ecocide that is most affecting our people at home in Africa and in the diasporas, and other peoples racialized as non-European or non-white. Okay, I don't like the term people of color, so I don't use it, but people from Asia and so forth, who are also most affected due to this ecocide because of the patterns of extraction that came via European settler colonialism and enslavement of African, Aboriginal and indigenous peoples of the earth, however people self-define that, then we have a common interest. And we have an interest in uniting tactically with those who also want to stop ecocide and other harms to our planet and our earth that sustains all life. Now, what's interesting about some of the non-Africans, and in particular people of European heritage in Extinction Rebellion, you know, it's true, it's actually quite a middle-class movement. So a lot of the people who are choosing, they're comfortable, some of them. Right. They've got access to resources, some of them. I would say comparatively compared to activists in our community, they know what lifestyle they live or what they've acquired through whatever means. But even some of them are saying, in terms of the damage that's being done by this oligarchy, you know, this system that we have of, you know, that's destroying all life forms, including us, and is going to prevent our children from being able to intergenerationally benefit from what they're scared about that. So that's why they're rebelling. So on that basis, you can see a tactical alliance can be formed. Now there's also what's coming on the horizon, and it's not, when we talk about war on the horizon, it's here, but there is going to be an intensification of what's called eco-fascism. With this rising emergency of climate and ecological crisis or emergency. Eco-fascism, but using so-called protection of and love of the environment to prevent what is seen as a bigger harm. So the depopulation agendas in Africa. On our Stop the Mangamese campaign, we talk about that. There's going to be an intensification of eco-fascism, and we're beginning to already see that, where some people, because they are able to harness white power, white supremacy, racism, are sort of saying, well, we need to preserve, you know, save the animals. There's too many Africans. They're having too many children. So it's our responsibility to prevent eco-fascism as it will be deployed against our people. And we're not going to do that just by ourselves, because the system has been set up and there's such imbalances in power. As I said, we don't have the planes and the warships and what have you. So when certain people need to be evacuated because there's been a great flooding of, look what happened in Beira. Yeah? Look at what's happened around the hurricanes in the Caribbean and in certain parts of the Americas. Okay? Our people are still trying to reconstruct all right now. But trust me, in terms of the power that these people who've been ruling over us have been able to amass, they will try and save themselves, which is why they're talking about exploring all these other planets. And I know there are many who'll say, yeah, but we did all that. I'm not going there now because we're not actually controlling that right now in terms of the space race. And quite frankly, some of us actually believe that Earth is our home, and we don't feel the option is there right now to say we're going to go and now colonize Mars or somewhere else.
Serious B star system.
Okay, I know there are some amongst us, but let's not, you know, fall out over that. Yes. But we need to be tactical around this. And most people probably do view this Earth as their home. Many of our people who might not quite see the importance of Africa, but who are in the Caribbean, those islands may not be there 100 years from now. What's going to happen to our people? So when this intensification for the resources of the planet heats up, and bearing in mind the reports that Europeans have done that have showed us the resources are being extracted, we're not even benefiting from them. And they will want to keep a small group of the ruling elites will want to preserve a certain lifestyle and wealth and riches for themselves. And when it comes to the rest of us, we're just basically seen as expendables who will perish, because that kind of eugenicist thinking and that survival of the fittest thinking is still there. So we need to ensure any decisions that are being made about the future of our lands, our peoples, our resources, that we are part of it. that we are at least the spook who sits by the door to know what's being planned. Now, how are you going to know that if you're not engaging with people outside of your community? Because there are things that some of them know, even about what is being planned, that only those in our governments know, and they're keeping it from the people. They're keeping it from the people because they have got a certain amount of wealth and resources where they can fly out. They can fly out, but the masses of our people won't. So our people need to know what is coming. And some of those people who are leaders in Extinction Rebellion, and even ordinary people who have aligned with its cause, that's what they're trying to preserve for themselves. So we have formed a tactical alliance via the Stop the Maangamizi campaign with them. And many of them also recognize that harm has been done to people and planet, and there must be repair. So you cannot tackle climate and ecological emergency without reparations or reparatory justice. We have been forging this understanding, or overstanding, as we say, amongst some of those people, through telling them that actually, if you're going to deal with African people, indigenous people, Asian people, you need to recognize our anti-colonial struggles. You need to recognize that we're still struggling to reassert our sovereignty and self-determination. Reparatory justice is the lens, especially for African people, particularly, that our leaders, our movements are rising to this crescendo and uniting around. Okay, so if you want to do your bit for humanity and the planet, you support our leadership in our struggle to repair ourselves. And that's what some of them have agreed to do. Not through words, but through action. And one of the ways that some of them feel they can best show that is to say, on this day, that we recognize is a day that is significant for you, that we want to show our solidarity with you, because we recognize your own leadership and stewardship of the earth and the resources of the earth, and that in order to have that equity, you are going to need to restore yourselves to be mothers and fathers of human civilization again, and custodians with the indigenous peoples of the earth. Some of them get that. Some of them get that. Not all, but some of them do. Because even amongst them, they've got different degrees of the illness of white supremacy racism, because they have internalized it, and some of them are working to rid themselves of it. But they can't do that unless there is a counter movement that is holding even that light and shining that light back of truth on them, as to be the gauge as to whether they are actually in equilibrium or not. So that is why some of them have agreed to support. And let me also say, by way of an update, one of the offshoots that have come out of this organising, with many who are now becoming concerned with what's happening to our environment, especially because of what it means for African and African Caribbean people and other African diaspora populations around the world, is that there has been a campaign, which is not Extinction Rebellion, but some people who were in Extinction Rebellion founded it, called the CEE, the Truth, Climate and Ecological Emergency Independence. And as a result of that partnership, one of our campaign members, campaign teams, Kofi Mawuli-Klu, stood in the recent European parliamentary elections as a candidate with the CEE, the Truth Independence. And as a result of that relationship, that campaign adopted 3 aims, the third of which was calling for citizens' assemblies, the recognition of planet repairs, and reparations. A political, not party, but a group of people who stood as independents with a reparations platform as a result of allyship Now, some people don't believe in parliamentary politics and elections and voting. That's fine. We know it's got limitations, but many of our people do. And it is just one of the tactics, one of the ways that our people are finding to chip away at the system and to resist and rebel and to ensure that we can utilize even some of their platforms to amplify the voices of our people, just as many of our anti-colonial leaders utilize the UN for that purpose. They went there and they spoke about what the national liberation students movements and the armed movements were doing. That's what they utilized the UN for. It was a platform to speak to the rest of humanity and to challenge the lies and the distortions of reality and the untruths that imperial powers always, advance through their media and their political institutions and so forth, and their ways to kind of economically sort of sabotage sort of autonomous organizing. So that is one thing in terms of, well, what have we gained? That was one thing. Now, that was for our people. Yeah, because a majority, and it wasn't just, there was other candidates from other ethnicities, Asian people who stood, and people were tactically chosen to represent different communities because they best could frame climate and ecological emergency according to their people's interests. And for us, we insisted on less reparatory justice is in there, in recognizing that it's not only, the damage has not only been done to us, the very life forms, our food systems, the air is being tampered with. So how can we even survive if we can't breathe? Because we live in areas where there's huge toxicity and our children are more likely to have all these respiratory illnesses and what have you because of environmental racism. So this is the importance of forming some of these alliances, and whether we like it or not, because the media, the white stream media, is always reporting about Extinction Rebellion and any kind of offshoots, even critiquing it. And there's lots of critiques that one could make of it, all right? I'm not denying any of that. But a lot of our people, they're not listening to us. We're calling them, we're even pleading, please, at least just sign the petition. That's one thing, tactically, all right? Come out on the day. A lot of our own people are not necessarily hearing those pleas because it's not being made something that's everywhere in the news. Right. But if this march was being reported on in that way, I'm sure a lot more of our people would be attracted to it, because there is something about the psyche where people begin to feel, oh, this is something I need to be involved with, because whether it's good or bad, I need to be I want to find out what's all this stuff about. So many of our own people are joining Extinction Rebellion. Now, without campaigns such as the Stop the Ma'angamizi campaign, how can we even try and wrestle and win over some of our own people who don't get to hear because of the limitations of media and reporting around what we do, about what we're doing, who may not even think that, well, Ma'angamizi, oh, that's African, genocide, that's a bit too strong. We also have a battle for the minds and the hearts of our own people. And sometimes the way we reach our own is, unfortunately, you have to go into someone else's house, someone else's organization, to try and win back some of your own people, who, once they become aware of sometimes what the alternatives are, and if they feel it's viable, and if they feel that, yeah, okay, this is a leadership that I can support or even be part of, you win them over too. Remember, war. And when we're talking about war, we have to try and win over as many people to our side and in defense of our cause as possible. And that includes people who are non-African, who are recognizing the leadership and the stewardship of the original peoples of the earth. African people, indigenous people, Aboriginal people. That's why some of us are working with those allies. And preparation work happens. Discussions have been happening. So it's not that they just turn up Many of them are also showing that they're serious about allyship by when they organise meetings in our community centres. They put resources back into our community. They engage with our community leaders. They invite them onto their platforms so that we can even debate with each other, discourse with each other, challenge each other with our different truths or our different realities. That work is being done. And it's only the ones that we know that we have those relationships with, that those are the ones that will naturally want to be part of a non-African allies bloc, which it has existed from 2016. Okay.
Perfect. All right. Final question, and we're just going to get into general stuff. It's okay. About the march here. This is another one of them probing questions.
Yes.
But just in relation to the march and reparations activities in the UK, we know that it's not all coming under one banner.
Yeah.
There are various different reparations formations in the UK, and at different points there has been, I'd say, greater unity than other times. Yeah,
absolutely.
You know what I'm saying? And maybe we have to ask this in relation to the march, because sometimes the fallout from some of this stuff has happened on the march itself. So really, the question really is there an avenue for forging a greater unity even among the reparations activists and movements in the UK? And if so, what is that?
I would say